This is my title. I'm going to explain what all of this is. And so here we go. I am a feminist, and feminism has this, one of its many sayings is the personal is political. I come to this topic not as just a theoretician in an ivory tower. I come to this topic also because it's personal. COVID has greatly affected my family. I am an African American and we are disproportionately affected by COVID. So in the New York area where I grew up and also worked, I have had 14 relatives who got the virus, and 3 of them have passed away, including most recently my 90-year-old aunt, Bess Pruitt. I also have a number of relatives in Texas because my son married a Mexican-American woman, Zaira, in August. And in that, those in-laws of mine, they have now had 20 relatives who have had COVID. And so far, no one has passed away, fortunately, up to this moment. And so this disease is ravaging different aspects, different parts of my extended family. And my partner, James, and I, we're locked down pretty tightly in Iowa City, Iowa, where I live, because James has emphysema, and we are both getting up there in our 60s. And so we don't dare go out, as we used to. So this presentation today is in honor of these relatives, especially my godmother, Bess Pruitt. I am going to be speaking from the perspective of global critical race feminism. And I realize many of you may have never heard that term before, and it's a precise term, and I'm going to talk about where the name comes from. And I'm going to apply it in the context of COVID. And to me, we are facing every day in the COVID world traumatic stress disorder. We normally think of post-traumatic, but we're not post anything, we're in it. So COVID makes us feel traumatic stress disorder. Those of us who have it, those of us who have relatives that have it, and the whole world who, each country being affected differently. So global critical race feminism focuses on the status of women of color around the world. And that means whether they are a minority who is, like in the UK or the US, or they are in countries where they could be the majority of the people in the country, women of color in the majority, but nevertheless, in every country, this broad category means that usually the women are at the bottom of that society. They're at the bottom economically in terms of education, in terms of employment. And so even though the situations in each country could be very different, they have this in common, being at the bottom, subordinated in their various societies. So I'm now going to break it down a little more. What I'm saying, the voice I will be speaking from, we draw from critical legal studies, critical race theory, feminist theory, and womanist studies. On the right there, you see one of my readers I have done called Critical Race Feminism from NYU Press. I'm sure many of our participants are familiar with critical legal studies, starting in the 1970s, influenced by postmodernism, people like Foucault and Derrida. On the left, Mark Kelman was an American, is an American founder of this movement. And so these critters, were men in the elite schools of the world, Ivy Leaguers, etc., who were coming from a left-wing, progressive, some Marxist perspective on the law. Then there were people of color, like on the right at the bottom, Professor Derek Bell, and above him, Professor Richard Delgado and his wife, Jean Stefancic, who liked critical legal studies, but felt it focused on class without giving any context to race issues. So these people pictured and others started critical race theory in the 80s. And there are a number of readers related to critical race theory. I'm a co-editor there of Law Unbound, which is a collection of readings of Richard Delgado, one of the founders of critical race theory. Then critical race theory really stretched out and developed related areas. And so we have critical white studies. Today, everybody's talking about white privilege, like it's just a word you say, but critical white studies started focusing on this back in the early 90s. We have Latino critical studies. We have queer race crit, in other words, LGBTQ people of color. We have Indian crit, which is talking about Native Americans, Asian crit. We have E-crit, which is empirical studies crit, in other words, using empirical analysis to back up your claims on race and other types of discrimination. And we have something called discrit relating to people with disabilities. So all of these have spun out, all of these have readers. There's so much to read in all these areas if you all are interested. So then we get into the feminist theory, and critical race feminism is intertwined in part with classic feminist jurisprudence. And of course, you all have probably heard of some of these people. There you can't really tell, but that's me with Catherine McKinnon. And then critical race feminism also draws from outside of the law. There are Black women who for many decades have been writing about the particular position of Black women or women of color. And so Angela Y. Davis is probably the most famous, but we have wonderful people like those pictured there. And so then when you get to critical race feminism in law, specifically, we have a number of theorists, including Professor Angela Harris, who focuses a lot from the early 90s on anti-essentialist theory. Mari Matsuda from University of Hawaii focuses a lot and says, look to the bottom, make sure you look at the plight of women at the bottom, not just elite women. And then Kimberly Crenshaw is probably the most famous right now globally, and she is well known for intersectionality of various kinds. Other disciplines, of course, we're talking about these things, but within law, she's probably, at least in the US, the most famous person talking about the different intersectional types of discrimination. Then when you move to the global level, critical race feminism, global critical race feminism, we are inspired a lot by different global theory, by TWAIL, Third World Approaches to International Law. And so there's a variety of wonderful scholars that write on these topics. So then when you add in global critical race feminism, this is another one of my readers that I did some years ago. We are interested in these sorts of international issues, and as they relate, as I said, to women of color. So that's the background, right? The voice that I'm speaking from and all of this that's intertwined. So now I'll go specifically to, okay, how does this help you in analyzing COVID? So some authors have called what we're in now, instead of a recession, a she-session, because the impact of COVID it's been disproportional on women around the world, right? So when you look at the fact that it is women who now are often trapped at home, et cetera, and is that being focused on by the different societies? And so the levels of violence are not being adequately measured. So women who were already suffering from what some would call domestic violence or domestic terrorism, and then here they are trapped maybe in their house, not going out, and maybe that spouse or partner is frustrated, and so the levels of violence can be really escalating. And then within communities of color, who are more unlikely, in the US perspective at least, I don't know about UK, to go to the police to report these things. So this is part of the she session that COVID has led to around the world. In terms of health, the fact that so many billions of people do not have running water. So the fact when you say, well, just wash your hands, presumes that you have water with which to wash your hands. And of course, it would be women who would be trying to help make sure the family is doing that. And then women, of course, need access to water for a variety of things that they don't have. So the lack of water. My boss at the University of Iowa, Dean Kevin Washburn, he's a Native American, and many Native Americans don't have running water. The Navajo tribe, you know, a huge area of land, and they don't have, a lot of them, something like 40% don't have running water or electricity. Economically, we know women earn less. They are heading single households in many cases. Their jobs are more insecure, so they aren't able to absorb the shocks. And so then when you talk about women of color, they always are earning the least of all of the groups, and are in the most insecure jobs. And so they are far less able to be able to manage in this situation. And also around the world, women are doing the bulk of the unpaid labor. Apparently, according to one study, women did 3 times as much domestic labor as men. It's probably more than that. And then all of the catering to the family needs. My in-laws in Texas, the mom has and the father have COVID. In other words, my son's in-laws, they both have COVID. And so the mother was taking care of her father who had COVID. So then she got COVID. And so then she's also trying to take care of herself and her husband who have COVID. And you know, and then they took the grandfather away for a while, and then they said, oh, we're going to bring him back to you. And so it's just horrible me hearing you know, from my son that here she's trying to manage all this while being sick herself. And she had been taking care of children, her grandchildren, that enabled her daughter to work. But because of getting infected herself, then those children had to be taken back to their house. And so then their mom can't work. And the other adult daughters who were living there had to go stay with their sister. And so you have all of these things going on that I'm experiencing, you know, hearing from my son, who, by the way, got married in August. I couldn't go down there to Texas because of 16 people in the family then having the virus at that time. Of course, women constitute a large number of the migrants around the world, and they can be in very wonderful professional positions, or they can be in jobs at the bottom. They may have to deal with a lot of gender specific restrictions, and they often are the most likely to hold insecure, low paid jobs. Many elite people who had maids and so forth in their families, or babysitters, had to let those people go a long time ago and can't let them back in. And then those families, you know, then they've lost income. And yet, in many countries, the migrants who have come in are not under the social system properly to get proper benefits. So now I'm going to segue to the US, which for me is domestic, but for you all, I think most of you all are not in the US. This will be international for you as well. So you all may be looking in the media. The US is totally out of control, absolutely totally out of control. And this is because we have 50 different states having 50 different views, and each state has different counties, and each county has different rules. And so it's a chaos. And then the whole thing has been politicized as well. So in the Republican states that have governors who are Republican, and that's most of our states, those governors, such as the governor of Iowa, never locked us down. So only now is our governor saying, oh yeah, maybe I should mandate masks. Maybe. Oh, but you can still go work out. So it's no wonder that we're out of control at this time. We've had 250,000 people who have died so far, 11 million or more that are infected, and probably it's 2 or 3 times that. So what has happened in terms of our people of color, you can see from this, if you look at the Black category there, Blacks are 4.7 higher in hospitalizations than whites, and 2.6 higher in cases, etc. You can see the Indians, American Indians, are 5.3 times higher in their hospitalizations. So most of these statistics are showing you that the people of color in the US are, as we would think, disproportionately affected. And people say, why is that? Well, also all these groups are disproportionately poorer, and they have disproportionately worse health statistics. And so if you live in poverty and you have bad health and not access, in the US, we have no national health care. It's no wonder that these very same groups would be affected in this way. So when you see this, you can see the percentages are very disproportional. So unfortunately, you can't trust these statistics. The statistics have been politicized. The Trump administration has not wanted people to know, has not had people collecting. And so the situation is probably far worse than what you guys are seeing here. But what is leaked out or is out there, it is very bad. So, for instance, my group, Blacks, we're a quarter of the deaths, according to the Center for Disease Control, which unfortunately has been politicized. And so interestingly, they even looked at the billing records and saw that Black patients are not as likely to be tested. So that's interesting too. And that's across the healthcare system. If I come in and saying, I think I'm having a heart attack, they might give me an aspirin. And if I was a white male, they would run all the tests. So that's how our healthcare system works anyway. It's racist to the core, and COVID is exemplifying that. So there was a case study in Louisiana, and so when you look at these statistics, it's also shocking. And here you can see the gender component. And Louisiana is a very poor state, and it's a state that has a very large Black population. And so, yet, and even though it's 31% Black, let's say you've got 71% of those dying are Black. And of course, they're not recording it properly. It might be 90% of those dying are Black. So very recently in September, I was saddened to see, look at this giant disproportion in terms of the number of women in the US that dropped out of the labor force compared to the men. That's astronomical. And of course it affects unemployment. And you see this even in the universities, right? It will, so it's not just, are you working at a supermarket, but it can apply at the highest levels, you know, in terms of the professions, that this is happening because people can't juggle all of these things. So this is interesting. If you look at the jobs in the US where women of color work, a lot of them do mani-pedis, right? Manicurists, pedicure, maids. And think of the impact of all of those, of COVID on all of those kinds of jobs, right? The places that are shut down. And then at the bottom, when you look at the percentage of occupations held by women of color, all of those jobs. My sister is an optician. You know, she puts glasses on people, and that got shut down. She works at Walmart. So they put her on the front line as a cashier, you know, with all the people. And some of these people don't wear masks. So she had a COVID test recently, and it showed she had antibodies. She had antibodies, and yet she hadn't been sick, like really sick, since November, which is before COVID was even, you know, recognized. So either she had it then, or else she had it this spring and was asymptomatic. But her mental state has not been good, right? As she continues to be on the front line in Walmart in suburban New Jersey. And, you know, people say you can get it again. And she is 62 years old, single at this time, and very worried, you know, about her health. So I wanted to make a little bit of a statement about what's happening in the UK. I assume you guys are on top of that. And so I just found this report, McKinsey report from October. And so it is saying, similar to the US, that your ethnic minorities are having higher death rates than your white population. And I'm sure there's a million different types of statistics, but they all, you know, are boiling down to the same thing, that different minority groups in different countries are going to be disproportionately affected. And you all have at least a national health care system. You may criticize it, but you at least have something. We in the US, we don't even have anything. But so I was looking at these statistics for the UK. So all of that, very depressing. So intersectional solutions. What are the solutions for dealing with COVID from a global critical race feminist perspective? We believe in intersecting. So it's not only political change or only economic change or only healthcare change. It is the intersection. In other words, what we need in each country, what we need globally, is an intersection of changes in all of these areas that get specific depending what group of people we're talking about and what they need. So here in this community I live in, you know, there's people who need childcare. There's people who are going to need help with the rent. We've had a rent moratorium for many months now, but when they lift that, there are going to be tens of millions of Americans who could be homeless because they haven't paid rent since April. So where's the money going to come from for that? You know, what good is it if, okay, I can give you childcare, but now you're homeless? So all of that is going to have to be looked at in an intersectional way. I have a phrase that's one of my favorites from Marian Wright Edelman, who heads the Children's Defense Fund. And she says, service is the rent we pay for living on the planet. Women around the world engage in all of this unpaid service disproportionately. So men do too, but women disproportionately. So the solutions are going to require service by all of us, by all of the communities, all of the groups, on a scale that is even more than what we've been doing, to the best of our ability. So those of us who are privileged And I realize I'm a privileged person in that even though I'm an African American, you know, I'm a professor, I'm a chaired professor. I live in a house with heat and electricity and good Wi-Fi, right? Critical in this day and age, good Wi-Fi. So it's incumbent on those of us who are in the academy with relative positions of privilege, perhaps, no matter what group we come from, to say, how is it that I can help? So I have 7 children and 15 grandchildren. And so I haven't seen those 3 of those grandchildren who live in this town since March. And they're Ethiopian. We adopted 2 Ethiopian young ladies many years ago. And so we've been tutoring the grandsons on Zoom. It's not enough at all for what they need, but it's a lot better than nothing to try to help them to keep up, because in the US, Black children kind of fall off a cliff in elementary school, and then they're constantly underachieving. And a lot of the males in particular end up in the criminal justice system. And so service of this type can be critical. So it doesn't have to be your relative. It can be people in your communities around the world, children or families that need your help. There's a family in Tunisia that I've been helping for many years, and their family has been, you know, affected by COVID, their community. And so I continue to reach out to give them resources in this situation. And so the last solution I want to mention here is what I call transcendence. It's important for us to not be overwhelmed and give up. A critical race feminist, a global critical race feminist, is always looking at transcending the situation, transcending the horrors that affected our communities for generations. And so despite how depressing this all is, we all must feel that we must participate in transcending and going forward. So another solution in the US, we had an election. The whole world looked at it. It was horrific, right? You all know what happened. However, it does appear that Joe Biden did win, both by the popular vote, which in our country doesn't even count, and by this weird, racist, ancient, you know, electoral college. So the Biden-Harris administration will be coming into power shortly. And of course, women of color, all people hopefully would be overjoyed that we will have the first vice president who is a woman, who is Black, who has Indian descent, and is a graduate of one of our Black universities. So this is so incredible and so powerful, and also perhaps part of the solution, because we know she is not going to forget people of color or women of color, right? And that's going to be upfront. So her with Joe Biden and their administration right now, they're picking half of their appointees will be women and 40% at least will be people of color. And that's totally different from the current administration that's like, I don't know, 95% white male appointees in all of the positions. But as we know, it's not just positions. You got to have plans. And so I was happy to see that the Biden-Harris team has produced a plan for Black America. This plan has aspects that will deal with health disparities and other issues listed here. And they have already announced their COVID team because that's clearly a top priority. And that COVID team, I think it has 3 heads and one of them is a Black woman. So, and the team is very diverse. So I feel confident that by having a diverse team that's going to be looking at all aspects of COVID, that's a start. Having a plan, that's a start. But as we know, you got to have the implementation, and it'll be difficult because of the intransigence of the Trump administration now in the transition, and whatever damage they will have done to the economy, to the health system, and things that we're going to be seeing, I'm sure, over the next few years, the damage they've done. But at least here's a plan. And that plan has incredible commitments, including things like helping with childcare, right? Women can't work without help from childcare, and protection from abuse, etc. So all of these. And the title of the plan, Lift Every Voice and Sing, that is titled from a very famous Black spiritual that is called the Black National Anthem. And it came over a century ago. So they named their plan after this very famous Black National Anthem. And these colors on the left, African Americans consider red, black, and green our colors. Red for the land, red for the blood, black for the people, and green for the land. And so this is all part of their plan. So in conclusion, I am hopeful, even in these dark, difficult times, that we will make progress as a world. We will make progress as in our specific nations to deal with COVID, and that in doing that, that we will not forget the plight of men, of women, of people of color, of different minorities around the world as we fight this deadly scourge. And I know you all will work with me on transcending and taking us to another level. And I look forward to the United States of America rejoining the international community in working on these issues. Thank you very much.